On guys, Sandman here. Thank you for tapping back in to part 2 of the Paradigm Media News Romper Room Gang spill. Also, for those of you who were here yesterday for part 1, I know the video came to an abrupt end, and for that we apologize. We decided to break the video up since it's so long into 2 parts. We hope you enjoy part 2.
When he arrived and unlocked the door, he discovered a group of men standing in the center of the room, rifling through a suitcase. He made the men drop everything and then told them to leave. This was perhaps the first time Detective Babcock realized Andre Hicks was more than your average Kansas City murder victim. He found a computer and recording materials, as well as dozens of Mac Dre CDs originally meant for a merch table. Detective Babcock spoke with the promoter, Damon Whitmill, 2 times in the weeks after Mac Dre's murder. He asked him if he'd submit a DNA sample and help with the investigation. Whitmill said that he'd need to check with his lawyer, Kansas City defense attorney Carl Bussey, before submitting to a mouth swab. According to the police records, Detective Babcock ran into Bussey 10 days later, on November 22nd, outside of the KCPD headquarters. He asked Bussey if Whitmill was ever going to provide that DNA sample. Bussey said that his client did not wish to provide the sample, saying that Whitmill was afraid that his DNA would be put in a database for comparisons to other crimes. The first real tip came the day after the murder, when Detective Babcock was contacted by the local media, who told them that a man had reached out with information about the car. The tipster had tried to reach Kansas City police but couldn't get through. He next called 41 Action News, the local television station, and told them he saw 2 black males between the ages of 20 and 30 ditch a black Infiniti G36 behind his house, get out, and then get into a faded blue van with tinted windows before leaving. Then witnesses didn't see the driver. The news station contacted Kansas City police and the car was located by 6 p.m., about 15 hours after the shooting took place, and it too was totaled. Detective Babcock saw 4 bullet holes near the back seat on the passenger side. It was clear they were firing from inside the vehicle by the way the metal curled outward. Detective Babcock learned that the black Infiniti G36 had been stolen out of a garage in Belton, Missouri the previous July. Police in Cass County had received multiple tips that a small-time criminal named Elijah Taylor had been seen driving the car in the months leading up to the murder. While Detective Babcock attempted to locate the driver or drivers of the black Infiniti G36, whispers of a Halloween weekend altercation between Mac Dre and Kansas City rapper Anthony Fat Tone Watkins began to pick up steam in the local rumor mill. The character arc of Fat Tone could be viewed as a prime example of what happens when keeping it real goes wrong. In the early 2000s, he'd begun gaining popularity for both his music and his rap sheet in equal measure. In 2001, at the age of 20, Fat Tone was arrested and charged with the double homicide of a 19-year-old girl and her unborn child. Killing an unborn child and its 19-year-old mother gained this guy popularity in Kansas City? I sure hope it was negative popularity, because baby killers are considered to be trash out here in California. He served 9 months in jail before the charges were dismissed, with prosecutors complaining that the witnesses refused to cooperate. Fat Tone did little to quell the rumors of his menace. His music as a violent gangster helped him sell records, which is ironic considering that music was probably one of the few hustles helping Fat Tone escape a life of crime. And his music was good. His brash, violent, and honest take on Midwest hip-hop captured the ears of his Bay Area contemporaries in a way other Kansas City rappers hadn't. Mac Dre and Sugar Wolf recorded a song with him for his 2002 album, Only a Killer City, titled Cutthroats. They were friends, and they stayed in touch enough for Fat Tone to know that Mac Dre was coming to town for Halloween weekend. Witnesses say they saw Fat Tone arguing with Mac Dre over stage time at the National Guard Armory show on October 29th. Dozens of tips recorded by KCPD feature some variation of Fat Tone and Mac Dre getting into an altercation. However, numerous witness statements say this never happened and police were never able to confirm it. Fat Tone and his lawyer met up with Detective Babcock on November 16th and denied any involvement in the murder, while acknowledging that he's heard the rumors about his alleged involvement. He tells Detective Babcock that every time something like this happens, he gets blamed and that he isn't worried because he knows he did nothing wrong. When speaking with detectives in the weeks after the murder, DJ Fresh, who was the Sandman and DJ that night, remembers Fat Tone briefly hopping on stage after being invited up by Mac Dre. Fat Tone was West Coast friendly, DJ Fresh says. He was the one everyone knew about over there. In a February 2021 interview, the Kansas City rapper Mr. Stinky said that he knew that he threw a show at the Atlantic Star the night before Mac Dre's murder, which only added to the confusion later on. It's all tangled up, Mr. Stinky says. He died on Halloween night, and I was throwing a Halloween party the night before. And what makes it even crazier is that Fat Tone shows up to my party and gets into a fight with someone later that night. So everybody's names are intertwining. Mr. Stinky said this incident helped lend credence to the numerous rumors that Fat Tone had gotten into a confrontation with Mac Dre that weekend, even though he says it never happened. Several months later, Fat Tone released a song where he denied having any involvement in Mac Dre's murder. However, rumors persisted that Fat Tone actually released a song admitting to the crime, although it's never been found. Fat Tone had a reputation, says Kansas City activist Alonzo Washington. It wasn't like he was the greatest rapper in town, but he would be getting into a lot of trouble with the law, and so he had this sort of edgy thing with his music. He used Mac Dre's name to get a little more street cred for his career, but I don't think he did it. In an interview with Kansas City's The Pitch from 2005, Detective Babcock said that he's convinced that Fat Tone did not kill Mac Dre. However, that did not stop Fat Tone from facing deadly consequences over the unfounded rumors. On May 23, 2005, 7 months after Mac Dre's killing, Fat Tone and his friend, Jermaine Akins, were murdered in Las Vegas in what is widely believed to have been retaliation for Mac Dre's death. This is where Mac Dre's death becomes the catalyst for the shooting deaths of 3 people, with 2 others being given life in prison, effectively losing their lives as well. It's a story that lives at the intersection of an extremely strange time in hip-hop history. One of the men convicted of killing Fat Tone was a fledgling rapper and rap promoter named Andre McMinister Dow, who recorded the spoken word portion of the intro to the Game's sophomore album, Doctor's Advocate, while on the run for killing Fat Tone. McMinister was a suspect in the murder of a call girl from Utah named Lee Danae Larson. After being featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted, Dow was arrested in San Francisco in March of 2006. He was later convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder in 2008 for the murder of Fat Tone and his friend, Jermaine Watkins, and is serving a life sentence in a Nevada state prison. Although McMinister maintains his innocence, the judge decided to uphold his life sentence in 2010 after Dow's lawyers argued that mistakes were made during the trial. While the tips regarding Fat Tone's culpability continued to flood in, Detective Babcock was convinced that he had nothing to do with it and started spending his time on more credible theories. In the years after Mac Dre's murder, Detective Babcock began to hear rumors that Damon Whitmill, the promoter who paid to fly Mac Dre to Kansas City, might have also paid to have him murdered. In 2008, Detective Babcock spoke with a jailhouse informant, David Thibault, while he was in federal custody on unrelated charges at the Charles Evans Whitaker Federal Courthouse. In his interview with Babcock, Thibault said that he grew up with Whitmill in Kansas City and that he'd heard him bragging about sending people to kill Mac Dre over a failed concert arrangement. He also provided names for the supposed shooters. One of those names was Papoose, who Detective Babcock remembered from his interview with Elijah Taylor, who said Papoose was the nickname of the person seen driving the stolen black Infiniti G36. During the police interview, Thibault also said that Whitmill made a concerted effort to spread rumors that Kansas City rapper Fat Tone had been responsible. Aside from Thibault and Taylor, over a dozen witnesses and informants reported seeing Calvert Papoose Antoine II driving the black Infiniti G36, with multiple witnesses saying that he even paid to tint the windows in the month before the murder. Papoose's father is infamous in Kansas City as the drug dealer and convicted murderer who narrowly avoided a death sentence in 1995 in a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. The senior Antoine was convicted and sentenced to death for the murders of two brothers, George and Winston Jones, on November 11, 1983. Court documents identified the brothers as drug dealers, and Antoine was said to have worked for them. He shot Winston to death and was arrested with George as the two men struggled over a gun. The KCPD then, for some reason, locked both men in the same holding cell. 5 or 10 minutes later, an officer heard some yelling and looked into the holding cell to find George lying face down on the floor, bleeding from the nose and mouth, and Antoine sitting on a bench a few feet away. The officer stepped away to call for help. When he turned back, he saw Antoine in midair coming down with both feet on George's head. George died from head injuries a few days later. Antoine pled guilty to murder and was sentenced to death. He later appealed his sentence, saying that prosecutors unfairly argued that putting him on death row would be cheaper to taxpayers than housing him on death row. The prosecutor also said that the death would be painless, which the defense for Antoine argued was untrue and manipulative to the jury. The Supreme Court refused to reinstate the death penalty. The first time Antoine was mentioned in the court documents was on December 10, 2004, when an unnamed person told police that their cousin stole the black Infiniti and then later sold it to Papoose in June or July of 2004. Papoose and a friend asked them if they wanted to go to a rap concert on the night Mac Dre was murdered, according to the anonymous tip. The tipster declined and later saw both Papoose and the other man burning their clothes in an alleyway visible from their house around the time of the murder. After that night, the Infiniti was gone. On July 25, 2005, Detective Babcock interviewed Khalees White, a woman who had just been jailed on drug charges. She knew Papoose and said he'd given her rides in the black Infiniti in the month before Mac Dre's murder. She also said he paid to get the windows tinted and assumed some girl had rented it for him. A separate informant told detectives on March 3, 2006 that he had heard about Papoose bragging about being paid to kill Mac Dre while incarcerated at CCA Leavenworth. Yet another informant, Nicholas Bell, also incarcerated at CCA Leavenworth, told detectives a similar story on March 13, 2006. But on March 13, 2006, Papoose finally admitted to Detective Babcock that he had been in possession of the black Infiniti G36 used in Mac Dre's murder. He claimed to have sold the car to Fat Tone on the day before Halloween. Detective Babcock noted that he didn't believe Papoose was being truthful. Almost 10 years later, Papoose was murdered in an accident eerily similar to Mac Dre's death. In March 2014, local news reported that Papoose had been found dead in an upside-down SUV riddled with bullets. Police said the car crash happened as a result of the victim attempting to flee a shooting. According to KCPD, witnesses said they heard gunshots before seeing a silver Dodge Charger leaving the scene. In the years after the murder of Mac Dre, Detective Babcock spoke several times with Savino Davila, reputed to be one of Kansas City's largest cocaine dealers at the time, and the owner of the white van that Mac Dre had been riding in at the time of the shooting. But Detective Babcock also spoke to several jailhouse informants that Davila had been communicating with while awaiting trial at the Leavenworth Detention Center. One of those informants was Gary Patterson, who told Detective Babcock that he became friends with Davila while they were housed together in 2007. Patterson told Detective Babcock that Davila was trying to leverage information he knew about the Mac Dre murder to make a deal for leniency in his upcoming drug conspiracy case. According to the police reports, Davila told Patterson that on the night of the murder, he was with Mac Dre at the Atlantic Star. He said that the promoter Damon, or Big D, became mad at Mac Dre after he refused to perform, instead showing up late only to do a 30-minute walkthrough before leaving. According to his story, Whitmill then sent Cavert Papoose Antoine II and Tayron T. Baby Smith to kill Mac Dre, which they did with two separate guns and driving the black Infiniti. Another informant from Leavenworth told a similar story with Detective Babcock. The informant told Detective Babcock that Davila called Piercy, the driver of his van that was transporting Mac Dre, to find out their location for Whitmill, who then sent the shooters to attack the van, resulting in Mac Dre's death. Davila wanted to leave out that last part for fear of incriminating himself, according to the informant. In an interview conducted later with Davila, he denied ever speaking about the case with other inmates. That can't be true, Davila says. I never discussed anything with anybody at Leavenworth. When guys are incarcerated, they try to come up with these schemes and these stories to try to help themselves. That's just what they do. It's part of the culture. But Davila spoke with more people than just jailhouse snitches in 2008. He shared a version of events with Detective Babcock that could have solved the case more than a decade ago, had he decided to follow through with his statement. In his final interview with Detective Babcock in 2008, Davila implicated Damon Whitmill as having ordered the hit on Mac Dre, with Calvert, Papoose, Antoine II, and Tayron T. Baby Smith as the actual shooters. After talking with detectives, I went back to my cell and laid down. I thought about my life and how I ended up talking to them and realized that it wasn't me, that I wasn't raised that way, Davila said in a January 2021 interview. I just couldn't be responsible for putting another man behind bars. I couldn't do it. I could have gone home off that case, but it just wasn't me. Davila recanted his previous story and told Detective Babcock that he remembered seeing a black Infiniti G36 pass his car before witnessing Papoose hanging an automatic rifle out of the passenger side window, shooting recklessly into the driver's side of his white van. Then, according to Davila, the driver of the Infiniti sideswiped the van. This stuck out to Detective Babcock since the vehicle ramming hadn't been information released to the public. I feel bad because I know Dre's family would have wanted to get justice for him, Davila says in January 2021, but I just couldn't do it. That's why the prosecution on my case was so upset with me and ultimately why they sentenced me to 30 years. Davila continues, I'm truly sorry about not being able to provide that sense of peace for his family and that those guys weren't held accountable for that senseless crime. Tayron T. Baby Smith was shot and killed on the morning of June 12, 2010. His body was found in a light-colored Chevy Blazer at the intersection of 73rd and Indiana, near the Noble and Gregory Ridge area of Kansas City, Missouri. He had been shot 13 times. Just like Papoose, Kansas City police never arrested anyone for Smith's murder, and there's no proof it's connected to Mac Dre's shooting. This case and the half-dozen other cases that were connected to it was about prominence, prestige, loyalty, retribution, staying true to the game, and most importantly of all, being down for your boys and those who you consider to be extended family. When Mac Dre went out to perform in Kansas City and was later murdered behind a disagreement he allegedly had with a concert promoter, it subsequently set off a chain of events that resulted in a slew of bullet-torn bodies, long prison sentences, and tangled loyalties. Andre Mac Minister Dow considered Mac Dre to be more than just a friend and a fellow rap artist. He considered Mac Dre to be fam. He was like a brother. A lot of people were trying to turn this into another East Coast, West Coast type of beef, like the beef between Tupac and the notorious B.I.G. But this wasn't about that. This was about avenging one of the Bay Area's greatest hip-hop legends, the pioneer and catalyst of the hyphy movement. This was about serving up some justice. Not in the context of calling 911 and having law enforcement make some arrest on those who they consider to be the perpetrators. This was about serving up some street justice, holding court in the streets and imposing a death sentence on sight. Mac Minister demonstrated to the world that he's a real one. He did what you're supposed to do when someone fucks with your family or those who you proclaim to be loyal to. When Mac Minister found out that the streets had dubbed a Kansas City rapper named Fat Tone as the one responsible for taking out Mac Dre, he went on a mission to find Fat Tone and handle his business. Once Mac Minister got a line on Fat Tone and found out that he was going to be in Las Vegas for the Snoop Dogg concert, Mac Minister got a hold of one of his closest friends, Jason Mathis, and made plans to find Fat Tone wherever he was in Las Vegas. When Mac Minister and Mathis made their trip to Las Vegas, Mac Minister's girlfriend, who was also a call girl, Lee Danae Lorison, accompanied them during their trip. Jason, who was apparently also closely associated with the Romper Room gang, had just as much loyalty for Mac Dre and was game to catch however many bodies was necessary in order to avenge Mac Dre's murder. On the night Mac Minister and Mathis finally caught up with Fat Tone, he was with a close friend, Jermaine Cowboy Akins. Although Cowboy wasn't identified as being involved in Mac Dre's murder, he still became collateral damage just based on the fact that he was with Fat Tone. Unfortunately, that's just the way it goes. Guilt by association would be the reason why he was killed that night. According to Mathis's arrest warrant, he later admitted to a friend that he had shot Fat Tone and Cowboy for the specific purpose of avenging Mac Dre's killing. Mathis said he shot Fat Tone first and then chased Cowboy into the street and shot him while he was on the ground pleading for his life. Now that Mac Minister felt like he had accomplished what he had set out to do by killing Mac Dre's killers, there was one other thing on his mind that continued to weigh on his conscience. Those who could hurt him in the form of witnesses. Mac Minister wasn't concerned about his boy Mathis. He was solid and he knew he could trust him. But Lee Danae Lorison, the call girl, was a different story. She not only had direct knowledge of the killings, but she would definitely be pressed by law enforcement at some point because they had used her to purchase ammunition in a local Las Vegas gun store a few days before the killings. The news had also reported that witnesses said that they had seen a white Pontiac Sunfire speeding away from the crime scene. He had no choice. She had to die. A day later, a white 2000 Pontiac Sunfire convertible was found burning in Vallejo. The registered owner was Lee Danae Lorison. On the night of November 4th, Fairfield police officers went to a quiet neighborhood after residents reported hearing gunfire. Lorison was pronounced dead at the scene from a head wound. A dark-colored SUV was seen speeding away. Soon after, Mathis's Saturn sedan, which Lorison had been driving, turned up burning in Richmond. Years after Fat Tone was killed, it was found out that he too would also fall victim to collateral damage. Immediately after Mac Dre's murder, Damon Big D Whitmill, the concert promoter that had the disagreement with Mac Dre, purposely began generating rumors that Fat Tone was involved to deflect attention away from one of the real killers, Calvert Papoose Antoine. This rumor gained traction real fast in the streets, and before you knew it, these rumors had traveled all the way back to the San Francisco Bay Area. Some would say that Fat Tone died mistakenly when he was killed that night, but I disagree. I contend that Fat Tone died as the result of bad karma catching up to him for the young mother and unborn child that he was accused of killing years before this. Whether people agree with this or not, it's all a matter of opinion. In the world of hip-hop, bad blood often means good business. At any rate, it's obvious that Mac Dre had a lot of people who were loyal to him and that they were also willing to kill to avenge his murder. After Mac Minister was sentenced to life and Mathis was sentenced to 40 years for his role in the murders, the identities of Mac Dre's real killers, Papoose and T-Baby, became known due in part to bragging, confidential informants, and the full confession of Savino Davila. For Papoose, it was almost deja vu all over again. Papoose's murder was eerily similar to Mac Dre's. His bullet-riddled body was found in an upside-down SUV that was obviously fleeing his killers. The killer or killers unloaded over 30 rounds from a high-powered assault rifle. Not long after, T-Baby was shot and killed on the morning of June 12, 2010. Like Papoose, his body was found in a light-colored Chevy Blazer after being ran down and shot with high-powered assault rifles. It's been almost 18 years since some of us heard about Mac Dre's murder during a dreadful segment of either local or world news. And despite the fact that it's been almost 2 decades since Mac Dre was killed, his legacy continues to live on, either through his music or through some of the trends that we still see today. Something else Mac Dre was known for and had pioneered during his short career was bringing the black and brown cultures together. He shattered ethnic boundaries and began working with a number of aspiring Hispanic rappers such as Gold Toes, Gangsta Flea, Louis Logue, Lucky Luciano, Benny Blanco, Tone Loc, Mousy, and many others. Mac Dre opened the door and collaborated with a lot of Latin rap artists from all over the Bay Area, which started several other movements like Thiz Nation, Black and Brown, Thiz Latin, and others. For a brief period, Mac Dre's death reinvigorated the hyphy movement, and he became its larger-than-life symbol. Tattoos, decals, shirts, and more bearing his likeness proliferated the hip-hop market and continued to breathe new life into the hyphy nation. There's no question about the fact that Gold Toes earned his own right to become a producer and that he achieved a lot of his own accomplishments under the Thiz Latin label. But it's also hard to believe that he would have been able to effectuate the level of success he has without the backing and collaboration from the godfather of the Thiz movement himself, Mac Dre. Knowing Gold Toes myself personally and having grown up with him and a lot of his artists, I know for a fact that he would agree and give a lot of credit for his success to Mac Dre. Guys like Joe Drama and Tone Loc, who created his own version of Mac Dre's Trill TV after Mac Dre's demise, were and still are close friends of mine. A lot of the information contained in this story about Mac Dre and those involved in his murder actually didn't break until 2021, earlier this year. KCPD had been sitting on a lot of this information and had been skeptical about releasing it due to concerns about public reaction and how it might affect some of those who were allegedly involved. However, after people like Savino Davila, Elijah Taylor, and others who were either directly involved or who had information about these cases started talking, KCPD started releasing more information. The Romper Room gang continues to exist to this day. However, after the federal indictments in 2012, where 25 members and associates were indicted and convicted on federal charges, the gang is nearly defunct today. Some people who live in the crest continue to talk about it and claim to be part of it, but it's nowhere near as active as it was during the 80s and 90s. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. We have a lot of other good projects that we're planning on dropping in the near future, but one of the things that we're going to start getting back into due to an overwhelming amount of requests is individual member profiles. So be looking out for those soon. Also, I just want to let you guys know that we spent the better part of this week trying to revamp our Patreon page. However, we ran into problems with YouTube claiming that the content was too violent and that it was in violation of their policies. We're attempting to appeal their decision, but if push comes to shove, we'll try editing our videos and then see what happens when we try to re-upload them. So please bear with us. As always, we want to extend our appreciation to all of you who continue to support our channel, because if it wasn't for you, we'd cease to exist.